His thumb traced the curve of my bottom lip, a slow, deliberate pressure that sent a jolt straight to my spine. My breath hitched. The air, thick with the scent of green soap and antiseptic, suddenly felt thin, impossible to draw into my lungs. Cale's eyes, the color of storm clouds just before the rain, were narrowed in concentration, focused entirely on my mouth. He was so close I could feel the warmth radiating from his chest, see the faint stubble shadowing his jaw, count the tiny flecks of silver in his dark hair at the temples. For months, I had existed in this space with him, a client under the needle, but this felt different. This was not the detached, professional touch I had grown accustomed to. This was personal. Perfect, he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the point of contact. The word hung in the air between us, charged and heavy. He pulled his hand away, and a phantom warmth lingered in its place. He turned back to his station, the spell broken, and I could breathe again. I was just a canvas, a convenient patch of skin for his art. I had to remember that. It was the only thing that kept the ridiculous, fluttering hope in my chest from taking flight and making a complete fool of itself. For 2 years, I had been coming to Cale's shop, inward eye tattoo, letting him cover my arms and back with his intricate, grayscale designs. It had started as a way to reclaim a body I never felt comfortable in, to wear a story on my skin because I couldn't speak one with my voice. But somewhere along the line, it had become an excuse to spend 8 hours at a time in his quiet, focused presence. I watched him now as he selected a new cartridge, his movements economical and precise. Everything about Cale was contained, controlled. His shop was immaculate, a study in black, gray, and stainless steel. His work was legendary in the city, a fusion of neo-traditional lines and photorealistic shading. And his demeanor was a fortress. He was polite, professional, but always distant. I knew more about the lives of the other artists who worked in the open-plan studio than I did about the man who had spent more than 100 hours marking my skin. "You're sure about this, Julian?" he asked, not looking up from his task. He wiped down a fresh piece of stencil paper. "It's your face." "I'm sure," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. A week ago, he had told me about the international tattoo convention he was entering. He was building a new portfolio, pushing his style. He needed a model for a final, ambitious piece, a delicate, abstract cascade of filigree and shadow that would start at the temple, curve down the jaw, and frame the lips. A piece designed to draw the eye, to highlight expression. He'd been explaining the concept, his hands sketching in the air, and then his gaze had landed on me, and he'd gone still. He asked me if I would consider it. He offered to do it for free, for the portfolio rights. I knew it was a huge professional opportunity, but for me, the offer felt like a lifeline I hadn't known I was drowning for. "All right," he said, turning back to me. He held up the transfer paper, a faint purple sketch of the design on its surface. "Let's get this placed." The first session was all about placement. There was no needle, no permanent ink. Just Cale, his tools, and his hands on me. He spent hours positioning the stencil, wiping it off, and trying again. His touch was a constant, maddening presence. His fingers would press against my cheekbone to angle my head. The side of his hand would brush my neck. He'd lean in so close to check the alignment that his breath would ghost across my skin, smelling faintly of coffee and mint. My entire body was a tightly coiled spring of awareness. Every nerve ending was alive, cataloging the brief, incidental moments of contact. I was an expert in the art of self-deception, telling myself this was just part of the process, that my racing heart was a normal reaction to having a man who looked like a minor deity mapping out my face. It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. He worked in silence, mostly. Sometimes the quiet would be punctuated by the low thrum of music from the shop's speakers, usually some moody, atmospheric rock that suited him perfectly. My own internal monologue, however, was a cacophony. Is he looking at my mouth again? Did his fingers just linger on my jaw? He's so close. Too close. Not close enough. It was exhausting, this constant analysis of his every micro-expression, every subtle shift in his proximity. He was an unreadable book written in a language I desperately wanted to learn. "Breathe," he said once, his voice soft but firm. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath. I exhaled in a shaky rush, my cheeks flushing with heat. His eyes met mine in the large mirror we were facing. For a split second, I saw something flicker in their gray depths. Not pity, not annoyance, but something else. Something I couldn't name. Then it was gone, and he was all business again, his focus returning to the purple lines on my skin. That look became another piece of data for me to dissect later, alone in my quiet apartment. I would lie in bed and replay the moment, turning it over and over, trying to assign it a meaning that it probably never had. This was my life, a series of quiet observations from a safe distance, a collection of unspoken feelings that lived and died in the echo chamber of my own mind. I worked from home as a freelance editor, so my human contact was limited. Cale's shop was my main point of connection to the outside world, and he was the sun my lonely planet had inexplicably begun to orbit. The second session was the start of the actual line work. The familiar buzz of the tattoo machine filled the space between us, a sound I'd always found meditative. It grounded me. The slight, sharp sting of the needle was a real, tangible sensation that cut through the fog of my overthinking. I closed my eyes and focused on the feeling, on the rhythmic vibration, on the steady weight of Cale's hand anchoring my head. He started at my temple, a place of exquisite sensitivity. His other hand rested gently on my forehead, his thumb stroking back and forth in a small, soothing gesture I was sure he wasn't even aware he was making. But I was aware. I was aware of everything. The subtle scent of his sandalwood cologne, the soft texture of his black t-shirt where my arm sometimes brushed against it, the way his breathing deepened when he was focused on a particularly intricate line. These were the details I hoarded, tiny treasures of intimacy, real or imagined. Hours bled into one another. We took breaks where I would stretch my stiff limbs and he would roll his shoulders, a quiet groan escaping his lips. During one of these breaks, he handed me a bottle of water. Our fingers brushed. A simple, meaningless accident. But it felt like a static shock, a spark in the dry tinder of my longing. I pulled my hand back as if burned. He didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he gave no sign. He just leaned against his station, scrolling through something on his phone, his expression unreadable as ever. It was in these small, quiet moments that the tension was most potent. The work itself was a distraction, a performance, but the silences in between were where the truth lived. The unanswered questions, the unspoken possibilities. We were two people in a small, private world, surrounded by the tools of a strange and painful art form. And yet the most painful thing was the vast, silent space that separated us even when we were inches apart. The tattoo progressed over several weeks. The lines became shading, the shading became depth. The abstract design began to take on a life of its own, a beautiful scar I had chosen. It was becoming a part of me, and by extension, so was he. His art, his touch, his focus, it was all being etched permanently into my skin. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. One evening, we were working late. The other artists had packed up and gone home, leaving just the two of us in the cavernous space. The only sounds were the buzz of the needle and the sudden, violent drumming of rain against the large storefront window. A storm had rolled in, turning the late afternoon sky a bruised purple. Cale was shading a delicate section near my ear, his body curved over me in a protective arch. The air in the shop grew heavy, charged with ozone. Then, with a flicker and a loud crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building, the lights went out. The buzz of the needle died. We were plunged into an abrupt, profound darkness. Silence. My heart hammered against my ribs. The rain was a torrential roar against the glass. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel him. He hadn't moved. His hand was still resting on my shoulder, his body still a warm presence just above me. I could hear his breathing, slow and even, a stark contrast to my own frantic gasps. "Stay still," he said, his voice close, a calm anchor in the dark. I felt a slight shift, then the narrow beam of his phone's flashlight cut through the blackness, illuminating a small circle of the ceiling. He moved it around the room, assessing. "Power's out for the whole block, looks like." "Okay," I managed to say, my voice a weak whisper. He sighed, a sound of pure frustration. He moved the light until it found my face. I squinted against the sudden brightness. His own face was in shadow, just a silhouette behind the light. "Well, I guess that's it for tonight." We can't work like this. He straightened up, and the loss of his proximity was an immediate, hollow ache. I sat up on the table, my legs dangling over the side. The darkness felt immense now that he was farther away. It was a strange, suspended moment. We were no longer artist and client. We were just two people, trapped by a storm. Why this competition? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. The anonymity of the darkness made me bold. What's so important about it? He was quiet for a long moment. The beam of his phone was pointed at the floor now, creating a pale, dancing circle of light. I thought he wasn't going to answer. My mentor, he said finally, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. He taught me everything. How to hold the machine, how to stretch the skin, how to see the art in the anatomy. He always wanted to enter this one. The Prix de Lion, he called it the Olympics of tattooing. He was working on his portfolio for it when he got sick. He paused. The rain was relentless. He passed away last year. I'm doing it for him. Using some of his designs, his concepts. This piece, he gestured vaguely toward my face in the dark. It's based on one of his final sketches. He believed tattoos shouldn't just be on the body, but a part of it. Something that enhances, that flows with the person. I was speechless. He had shared something real, a piece of himself he kept hidden behind his professional wall. It was a gift, and I felt a sudden, fierce need to offer something in return. Why do you get so much work done? He asked, as if reading my mind. His voice was gentle, curious. You never seem like you're trying to show it off. I swallowed hard. The truth was a knot in my throat. I spent a long time feeling invisible. I said, the words clumsy and raw. Like a ghost in my own life. The tattoos, they make me feel solid. Like I'm really here. It's armor, I guess. The flashlight beam moved and caught his face for a second. His expression was one of intense, unguarded understanding. It was the look I had been searching for in the mirror for weeks, and seeing it now, so unexpectedly, stole my breath. I get that, he said quietly. We sat there in the dark, in the shared, fragile space of our confessions, until the rain softened to a drizzle and the power, with a hum and a flicker, returned. The sudden flood of sterile, white light felt like an intrusion. The magic of the moment was gone, and we were once again Cale the artist and Julian the client. He cleared his throat, all business again, and began to clean his station. But something had shifted between us. A wall had been breached. A new, more dangerous kind of tension had taken root. The final session was scheduled for a Saturday. It was just for the last, most delicate lines, the ones that would trace the edge of my lips. I arrived at the shop feeling a nervous energy that had nothing to do with the needle. The memory of our conversation in the dark was a constant presence, a subtext to every polite exchange. I felt exposed, seen. He was quiet as he prepped me, his movements even more precise than usual. He didn't meet my eyes. The air was thick with things unsaid. He put on his gloves with a sharp snap of latex. Okay, he said, his voice low. I'm going to draw the final placement on with a marker first. Need you to be perfectly still for this part. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I leaned my head back into the cradle. He leaned in, his face just inches from mine. His focus was absolute. I held my breath, my entire universe shrinking to the space between our faces. He used a fine-tipped surgical marker, his touch feather-light as he sketched a line along my upper lip. My skin tingled where he touched me. And then came the moment that would replay in my mind for eternity. He needed to steady my lower lip. Instead of just placing a finger on my chin, he used his thumb. He pressed it gently into the center of my bottom lip, his skin warm and slightly rough against mine. He held it there, anchoring me, and drew the final, perfect curve with the marker. His gaze was fixed on his work, but I could feel the slight tremor in his hand. Or maybe it was my own trembling I was projecting onto him. He finished the line, but he didn't move. His thumb remained, a point of searing heat on my mouth. His gaze lifted from my lip to my eyes. The storm clouds were back in his stare, swirling with an intensity that made my stomach swoop. He was so close. One movement, one tilt of the head, and our lips would be touching. The thought was so loud it was a roar in my ears. My own eyes flickered down to his mouth, to the thin, serious line of his lips. A silent question passed between us. A dare. This is it. It's happening. Perfect, he whispered, and the word was not about the art anymore. It was about the moment. About us. He pulled his hand away, and the cold air that rushed in to fill the space felt like a slap. He cleared his throat and stepped back, turning to his ink tray as if that single word, that single touch, hadn't just cracked the world wide open. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I felt dizzy, disoriented. Had I imagined it? The intensity, the meaning I had poured into that 1 second, was it all in my head? The doubt was a bitter poison. He finished the actual tattooing in a tense, almost complete silence. The buzz of the machine was the only sound. He was all efficiency, his movements clipped and professional. He was rebuilding the wall between us, brick by painstaking brick, and I was letting him. I didn't know how to stop him. When he was done, he wiped the area clean with a detached gentleness that was worse than any roughness. "All finished," he said, his voice flat. He began to pack away his equipment without looking at me. Disappointment, sharp and cold, settled in my gut. I had been so sure. I had let myself hope, and now I felt like a fool. I sat up, the plastic wrap on my face crinkling. I slid off the table, my movements stiff. I walked to the front desk to pay, my mind a blank hum of static. He followed me, ringing up the aftercare cream I was buying. The transaction was sterile, impersonal. This was how it would end. I would walk out the door, and we would go back to what we were. Only now the space between us would be filled with the ghost of a shared moment that he had already decided to forget. I handed him my card. As he took it, his fingers brushed mine, and this time, I was the one who flinched away. I saw a flicker of hurt in his eyes before he masked it. He handed the card back to me, our transaction complete. "Thanks, Cale," I said, my voice hollow. I turned to leave. I was at the door, my hand on the handle, when his voice stopped me. "Julian." I stopped, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't bear to see the professional indifference on his face. I waited. "Last week," he began, his voice hesitant. "In the storm. And today? It wasn't just about the tattoo." I slowly turned to face him. He was standing by the counter, his hands shoved into his pockets, looking at the floor. He looked nervous. Cale, the man of unshakable composure, looked vulnerable. "I woke up this morning," he continued, finally lifting his eyes to meet mine. "And I didn't regret what almost happened. I just wanted to see you again. Outside of this," he made a vague gesture that encompassed the shop, the needles, the art. I didn't know how to say it. Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees felt weak. It was a physical sensation, like a weight I hadn't known I was carrying had been lifted from my chest. I could breathe again. "Me too," I whispered. A slow smile spread across his face, a real, genuine smile that transformed his entire expression. It reached his eyes, chasing the storm clouds away and leaving something warm and bright in their place. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "The competition is in a month," he said, taking a step toward me. "In Montreal. It's a long drive." He stopped, just a few feet away. "Come with me." It wasn't a question. It was an offer. An invitation into his world, the one that existed beyond the walls of the shop. My internal monologue, my constant companion of doubt and anxiety, was silent for the first time in years. There was no analysis, no overthinking. There was only a simple, resounding certainty. "Yes," I said. The smile on his face widened. "Good." That night, I didn't go back to my empty apartment. He closed up the shop, and we walked up a narrow flight of stairs at the back that I had never noticed before. They led to his apartment, a spacious, sparsely furnished loft that was as clean and controlled as his workspace below. It was filled with books and sketches, evidence of the man behind the artist. It smelled like him, sandalwood and clean linen, and something faintly metallic from the shop. It smelled like safety. We didn't talk about what had happened, not directly. We didn't need to. We ordered pizza and sat on his worn leather couch, the box balanced between us. He told me more about his mentor, stories that made him laugh. I told him about the books I edited, about the quiet life I had built for myself. It was easy. It was natural. The tension that had defined our relationship for so long had finally dissipated, replaced by a comfortable, humming warmth. Later, as the city lights began to glitter outside the huge warehouse window, he reached out and gently touched my face. His fingers, calloused from his work, traced the lines of the new tattoo, the one that was now a permanent map of our story. His touch was no longer ambiguous or professional. It was possessive. It was tender. "It looks good on you," he said, his voice a low murmur, like it was always supposed to be there. I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes. I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a feeling so foreign I almost didn't recognize it. For years, I had come to him seeking armor, wanting to cover my skin, to hide myself behind a wall of ink. I thought it would make me feel strong, but it only ever made me feel more separate. He had seen through it all. He hadn't just looked at my skin, he had looked at me. And in the quiet concentration of his gaze, in the steady pressure of his hands, I had been found. I must have drifted off, because I woke up sometime later with my head on his shoulder and a heavy blanket draped over me. The pizza box was gone, the lights were dim, and Cale was watching me, his expression soft in the half-light. He didn't say anything. He just shifted slightly, allowing me to settle more comfortably against him. I could feel the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart beneath my ear. It was the most reassuring sound in the world. I am here. I am solid. As I closed my eyes again, letting the feeling of his warmth seep into my bones, I felt the phantom press of his thumb against my lip. Perfect. The word echoed not with the finality of a finished piece of art, but with the infinite possibility of a new beginning. I had walked into his shop a ghost, and I was walking out, or rather, staying in, as something whole. I had found my home in the steady hands of the artist who had drawn me back to life.